Hey guys, welcome back to the Basically Nomads Bus. Today we have another cool little project kind of dealing with technology. This over here is my gaming computer. This is what I use for some of my photo and video editing as well as playing games, and this is just our regular like desktop computer. And I've actually stored it on its side in our couch, which isn't very good for ventilation or how this case was meant to get the heat out of the case. So we're going to take all the components from this older gaming build that I've done. We're going to update a few things, and we're going to throw them into this ITX Mini computer case, which is going to fit much better in our storage area. But this is a mid-tower, and this is usually what you'll see in most people's homes. It's somewhere in between, you know, huge and tiny. But for a school bus build, obviously, it's just a little too big. So then over here we have what's called an ITX case, which is much smaller. Can be really good for maybe an entertainment center. You want something that's going to be out in the living room. Or on, you know, in our situation, if you're going to have a tiny home and you really need to downsize, I mean, just look at the size comparison. This is from the front and then from the side, just compared to my old case. It's 1/4 the size, maybe. So you can see the benefit that someone like me is going to have in a bus where space is really limited. So we're going to dive right into the parts list for this particular build. Things are going to vary depending on what you already have. So since we have all the components already of a gaming computer, a lot of this stuff was higher end about 3 years ago, but we're going to maintain a lot of that stuff until later on. The things that we're going to need to fit everything that's in this case into this case is a brand new motherboard, which this is the ROG Strix B450 gaming motherboard. Then we've also got a new power supply because a regular power supply will not fit in a Mini ITX. You're going to need an SFX power supply, which I have here. The Node 202 does have a version that comes with a 450 watt power supply, but since I'm going to be upgrading my graphics card at some point, it would no longer support that, so I had to get a little beefier power supply. The last thing that we're going to need for now is a low profile CPU cooler. My old CPU cooler is huge because it was able to be in this big case, but I had to switch to a very nice low profile CPU cooler, and we're going to go over all those parts as we start the build. Okay, now we're going to delve into the older computer, and we're going to start to cannibalize some of the old parts that I need. Everything's disconnected, so I won't be using the power supply. I will have to use the older graphics card and my CPU as well as my RAM. So those are the three big things that we're gonna go after here. Now we've got our CPU exposed and we can easily get to our RAM. So let's go ahead and pop out that RAM just by clicking on these tabs here on both sides. That'll eject them. And then we'll very carefully get our CPU out of here. This one is a Ryzen 1800X that I got about 2 years ago when it first came out. I think I spent like over $300 on it. They're already 2 generations past this, but first we're going to really clean the surface of this CPU off, get all that compound off of there. You can do this with like rubbing alcohol and an actual cloth. You're not supposed to use like paper towels and stuff apparently because you can get the fiber stuck on there. So I'm going to go clean this, and then we're going to get our graphics card out. Okay, there we go. So we've got our graphics card out. And so we're going to just give this a really good cleaning too before we put it into the new build. So last thing I need out is this SSD here that has my operating system on it. Okay, really quickly, I just wanted to kind of go over our parts, new and old. These are the parts here that we kind of pulled out of our older system, and so this is some of the new stuff that we're still going to put in yet. So we have our G-Skills Trident Z RAM. This is RGB RAM, 8 gigs of sticks, so we still have 16, which we will upgrade at some time. Okay, next we have that graphics card. We have a Sapphire Nitro RX 380X, which is actually a pretty old card by these standards. I do plan to upgrade to a 5700 XT in the very near future. This is the 1800X, which still really keeps up with all the games and all the editing, everything else that I do. It is an 8-core processor with 16 threads. Still a great processor. I'm going to stick with it for as long as I can. Then we have the Noctua CPU cooler, which we're gonna have to use because we need a much lower profile for our small case. So then we have our older 120 SSD that holds my operating system. And then for mass storage for the time being, I'm gonna use this 1 terabyte SSD, another Samsung. Got this for a really good deal. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna do is get our CPU and our CPU cooler. So we're gonna go ahead and drop the CPU in. Let's get a nice close-up of that happening. So there we go, there's our Ryzen 7 1800X. I'm gonna go ahead and put that CPU paste right in the middle. So as we're going here, we need to make sure that we're doing pressure evenly and we're going to each side. And that thing is on there nice and solid. So we can go ahead and install that RAM that we talked about earlier, our 16 gigs. And all you do for this is you can actually take your RAM and put it right next to the side. But you can see that little notch right there, and you can just compare that for where the notch is in the DIMM. So I can see my notches are right there. So we'll go ahead and make sure that these are open. Okay, and then just push it in until you hear that satisfying little click. There we go. That's pretty much most of our computer right here. We're gonna go ahead and install that in our case. The bottom is just attached with 4 little screws. Okay, now that we've got those 4 screws off, we can actually flip it over and take this whole top off. We already put in our I/O shield here, which just kind of popped in. And now we start the kind of tricky process. So we're gonna go I/O side first, so our I/O is over here. We're just gonna kind of slide it in, work it into our I/O shield without getting too much stuff in the way. Okay, there we have it. Our motherboard is installed. So I think next we're gonna kind of see some of the stranger components of what this case does very well and how it kind of hides away some of these components. So for example, it has no space for a regular spinning drive, which makes sense for as small as it is, but it has this really cool space for 2 SSDs, which is perfect because that's what we have. We've got our 2 SSDs mounted. I did go ahead and connect a lot of these wires. This thing is an absolute mess, and I can tell it's gonna be a nightmare to try to cable manage, but I went ahead and connected these because I noticed that once this is in, it's just gonna be a little bit harder to plug all these into the power supply. And this here is for your graphics card, which is actually going to come probably next to see how our cable management is going to work out. Took 4 screws to get that out of there. So this will be the basis of what the graphics card is going to kind of attach to with a riser system that we're going to have to use. Here's our basically our riser to get our graphics card to be where it's going to need to be. Okay, then we get to finally bring our graphics card back in. Okay, so then we actually mount that card to this. So once you get your graphics card in this little cradle that they've got for it, then you're going to attach that riser piece that we got earlier. So I very much had a bit of a fitment issue, not with the card so much, well, a little bit with the card. Apparently it was a little too wide and I had to bend up one of these tabs just to get it to fit in there. I also had to take apart this little riser piece and I couldn't install it like the book showed, which is just all as one cohesive unit and you just drop it down. I couldn't do that, but that's okay because it still worked out fine. So here it is. This is my full gaming computer. You saw what it looked like before, how big that case was. Everything that I had in there except for the spinning drives is now in here. And I think it is just amazing. The only problem that I've had with this case is the cable management. They kind of have this area right here where you're expected to have your cables, and it really doesn't work as well as I would hope. But other than that, I really liked it. I think it looks so clean. And so now we're gonna try to post. To be honest, I did do a post test before recording. It did not go well. It wouldn't post. And after some quick troubleshooting, I figured out that I just didn't have the graphics card hooked up all the way, thank God. So yeah, it's all running really well. We'll go ahead and start it up. Oh yeah, it's a beautiful thing. Well guys, that concludes today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Again, I hope that it can help somebody out there. If you're considering going tiny and you think that there's just no way you're going to be able to have your gaming experience, I was able to shove all that gaming stuff into a really small form factor PC, which is kind of really what you're doing whenever you're going tiny. You're just taking your life, you're taking everything, and you're just fitting it into a much smaller container. You're doing it in a much smarter way, and you're only bringing the things that you need with you, which is kind of what we did here today. Alright, I had to break in real quick. I've had some kind of updates since this video has been created, but I hadn't published it yet, so here are some updates with the case. I've had it for probably a month or so now, and I've had a couple issues actually. So it turns out that smashing all of your high-end gaming components into such a small case creates quite a few issues. The main one is heat. So this thing does not ventilate near as well as I think it should. I don't think that's just the result of where it is. It's also the result of some of the engineering. I've mentioned this case has some amazing engineering features in it, but it also has some poor ones. And some of those are the ventilation options that they chose for the CPU and the GPU. I had to hack off half of the side of the case to make sure that I could vent out all that hot air from the GPU. And I have cool air coming up from the bottom with 2 Noctua fans to help cool that down. So the GPU is no longer overheating, no issues there. My new issue, which I think I've resolved, is with the CPU side of it. So they have a vent right above the CPU, and I have that Noctua fan, which is supposed to be a great little fan, but I don't think it's performing as well as it should. Well, the other problem is there's no direct line to get that heat from the CPU straight up out of the case. So instead, it ends up just dispersing into the case, and eventually, once it's built up already, it starts to go out of the top of the case. So I added another case fan right above that. Hopefully that'll help. It has so far. The last big problem that I have with this case is the 1/4 inch little rubber mounts included for the bottom of the case to make sure that you're getting all that intake. It's just not big enough. You have to prop it up on something, or you have to get some bigger legs to stand it on. Otherwise, you're not going to get the amount of cool air pulled in there, because you're pulling cool air into the GPU side with 2 fans, so that's pulling quite a bit of air. And then you're also trying to get cool air over to your power supply, which can get really hot. I'd say I'd probably give it about a 6.5 out of 10. I really love the form factor. I love how small it is, how compact, especially in our tiny home in a Skoolie. It's great to have, but the ventilation and the mutilation that I've had to do to the case to make it work just really wasn't worth it for me. I kind of wish I would have found a better, more open and more ventilated option instead of having to go this route where I had to kind of hack it apart myself. Coming up, we're going to have some solar videos. I actually had to change out my solar charge controller, so I thought I'd take a chance to make a video of that. Plus, we're going to have a full tour of the solar coming up, so look forward to those. Alright guys, you know what to do. If you liked the video, smash that like button. Give me a comment down below what you thought, and don't forget to subscribe. It helps the channel. Everybody says it, but it's completely free and it helps. So we really appreciate it, guys. Until next time, bye.